Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. My name is Charles Good, your host and the president of the Institute for Management Studies. This podcast is designed to give you actionable insights and strategies that you can apply from discussing the research of esteemed leadership experts and practitioners to take your leadership to the next level. My goal is what we discuss today will be immediately actionable and useful to you, and I'd love to hear your comments from this episode of what you're planning on implementing. Today, I'm very happy to be joined by Maura Thomas, who's an award-winning international speaker on individual and corporate productivity and work-life balance, and is the most widely cited authority on attention management. She's also a TEDx speaker, founder of Regain Your Time, author of 6 books, and was named a top leadership speaker in Inc. magazine. And a personal side note, she's a fan of stories with happy endings, and I think we could use a lot more of those types of stories this day and age. So welcome to the program, Maura.
Thanks, Charles. I'm happy to be here.
Well, this episode, I love to focus on an area that you're passionate about, productivity and time management. And I love your different pitch on this because you start your book by asking the question that a lot of us find ourselves wondering, where does our time go? And we're looking for ways to get some of that time back. But as I'm sure many of our listeners are, I know that I find myself inundated by the latest and greatest productivity hacks, the app, the gadget, the promise that they can squeeze more out of your day. And you even cite a study in your book that you did an internet search on improved productivity that returned 211 million results. I find that incredible. Can you speak a little bit to, do you see this problem getting worse in our society? What are some ways we can combat it? And then I love how you feel that we're kind of asking the wrong question, right? Regarding time management and productivity.
I think the first thing we need to do when we think about how do we get better, how do we improve, we need to ask, what does productivity mean? And I think it's important to really clarify that. For me, productivity is about achieving more of what's important. And actually, that's what it says in the dictionary too. But I think we lose sight of that, right? When we think about how do I be more productive? Well, what do you mean by that? Because nobody's going to say they're more productive if they if they responded to 50 emails yesterday and 52 emails today. They're not going to say, "Ooh, I improved my productivity," right? That's not what we care about. It is progress on what we care about personally and professionally. So that's the first thing.
And you advocate that thinking about productivity and how it's messing up our lives, that we're hung up on this idea, which I am as well, on managing our time because we want to get more done throughout the day. But actually, that's really not the question we should be asking. We need to master how to manage our attention, correct?
Well, I think so because as long as we frame our productivity, our ability to achieve more of our significant results in terms of time management, I think it's going to continue to hold us back because number one, we really can't manage time, right? We have no control over it. Number two, when we engage in activities that we call time management, right? They are related to the clock. Time management means scheduling my days and planning my days and doing the things that I need when I decide it's time to do those things. But our days never go as planned. And, most people tell me that the most common way to manage their time is to make appointments with themselves on their calendar. But the problem with that is the first person you'll break an appointment with is yourself, right? And so we can't really manage time. And most of us, our plans are not really related to time, right? We have 8 million things that we need to get done today. But it doesn't matter if we do it at 9:30 or if we do it at 11:15 or right? There's no relationship to time for all the things that we have to do. Or there's a very weak relationship, right? I just need to do it soon or I need to do it by next Friday. But when in between now and then really doesn't matter. So it's not related to time.
That's a great point. I would add that also there's different priority levels for certain things where you can get inundated by the unimportant and not really focus on the things that are really meaningful that make an impact for you because you're just looking at it as, I want to stay busy, I want to stay productive, getting things done. But it's more important question to ask maybe is, what are you getting done? And does it really make an impact on those critical things for your job, for your life, for whatever it may be.
Well, and here's the other thing about prioritizing. In a lot of businesses, I think leaders have inadvertently created a metric that they didn't mean to create, a metric of success that they didn't mean to create. And that metric is speed, right? So we equate good service, whether that's my service to you or a service to my colleague or a service to a client or a service to a vendor, but good service, right? I'm good at my job if I respond quickly to communication, right? If I'm timely, if I'm a responsive person, right? And so we take those things to mean fast. Timely is fast, responsive is fast, right? And so we think I'm good at my job if I'm fast. And so we feel like we need to provide a fast response to every communication that comes in. And so therefore, every communication that comes in is high priority because it needs a fast response. And so if everything that you get is high priority, how do you prioritize? It's almost impossible. And so I think that's a mistake I see leaders making, is not creating their success metrics. I mean, some of them certainly, but not realizing that speed has become a success metric and making an intentional decision about whether or not they want that to be the case.
That's a great point. And when speed is the metric, then quality diminishes or is sacrificed to some extent. Because, like you stated, when everything becomes a priority, then nothing becomes a priority. And when you're trying to push out so much work so quickly, you're not taking the necessary time. And some tasks, by their elements, by inherently, they just take longer than others. And you want to do a good job because you're not only measured by the number of things you get done, but by how well you do them, right?
And it's really not even a matter of, sometimes it's a matter of how long it takes, but often it's a matter of how much brain power it takes. I talk a lot about brain power momentum, right? And if you need to be, it might only take 5 minutes, but if you need to give it 5 focused, uninterrupted minutes, often we don't do that. So being intentional about the success metric is really important, because the other thing is speed is not a differentiator. All of your competitors can be fast also. So yeah, I think that choosing our metrics, differentiating on those brain activities like quality and accuracy and creativity, right? Those are much better metrics. So here's the thing. The last reason that I'm not a big fan of time management is because our biggest problem today is not that we don't have enough time, right? We've all had days where we said, oh my gosh, I got so much done. What a great day. And we've all had days where we thought, oh my gosh, I was busy all day and I got nothing done. And in both of those cases, we had 24 hours, right? It's not that we had 26 hours one day and 22 hours another day. We had the same amount of time. Our biggest challenge today is not that we don't have enough time. It's that we have too many distractions. And you can't solve a distraction problem with a time solution. The antidote to distraction is attention. And so what is much more relevant today than time management is attention management.
I agree with you completely. And I agree that the enemy of attention is distraction. I love the statement in your book that you make that the job of the internet is to keep you on the internet. And we find ourselves stuck in this productivity paradox where we need these tools to do our jobs, but the job of these tools is to keep us using these tools at the expense of really everything else, right?
Right. And it's not just the internet. It's every app that we use, every piece of software, every technology that we have. The success metric of any type of technology is how often do people come to it, and how long do they stay when they get there? How often do you open that app on your phone, and how long do you use it once you open it? How often do you come to that website, and how long do you stay there once you're there? That's the metric of all of our technology. And so the world is literally conspiring to steal your attention. And so our only defense against that is our ability to manage our attention.
Great stuff. And we invite that constant stream of distraction into our lives every single day, like you said, with all those technological devices that we happily embrace. And they're more than happy to be there for us and taking us down those proverbial rabbit holes, right? Of the social media traps and whatnot. So, getting more onto attention management, can you provide us your definition of what that really means? And maybe we can then unpack some of those quadrants of your model as well.
Sure. Yeah. So the way I define attention management is really the practice of a collection of behaviors. And if you practice that collection of behaviors, so it's a combination of focus and concentration and mindfulness and daydreaming and kind of all the different ways that we use our brain, all the different brain states that we might be in. Once you practice recognizing where your attention is and having the opportunity to make a shift to the brain state that will produce the best results in the moment, to me that's the ultimate goal of attention management, is recognizing, like, am I in a place that's serving me right now? Am I in a headspace that will give me the best results in this moment? I like to say that I help people make the most of their moments, right? So recognizing, like, am I making the most of this moment? And could I shift my brain space, my head space, right? To produce better results right now.
So, it's really about being more mindful, getting out of autopilot and being aware of what state you're in, because it starts with that self awareness to know whether you're in a reactive and distractive mode, whether you're focused or mindful, or whether you're just daydreaming, right?
Yeah. So I created this model. It's the four quadrants of attention management. It really just sort of simplifies the types of headspace that we might be in into four. So it's a factor of how much control am I exerting over my attention and how much attention am I getting as a result. And so, yeah, the four states are reactive and distracted, focused and mindful, daydreaming or mind wandering, and flow. And flow is a little bit different in that flow is the only one that we can't really control, right? We can't say, I'm now going into flow. Here I go, right? It's the only thing we can do is create the state where we create the environment where we might get into flow. But really, to me, it has a lot in common with mindfulness. It certainly is a way to say, yes, I'm focusing on, what I'm doing. But to me, it's bigger than any one of those words. It encompasses kind of all of them in a way. And to me, there's less ambiguous because, like, for example, if you say, I am mindful, do you mean right now or do you mean all the time? Or if you could say, I'm focusing on this task, or you could say, I'm focusing on my wellness, right? Like, those mean two very different things in the actual act. So to me, it encompasses all of the practice of all of these different behaviors.
I love that. And I love how getting that awareness moment by moment really makes that difference and that impact. And I would argue that for me, and anyway, I'm in a lot of reactive, distractive mode. So having that self awareness to get me out of that mode, to get me into one of these other states is so essential. And I think that's probably the issue with lots of leaders these days. And have you found, so you talk in your book about daydreaming, that can actually be a positive. It's not just a negative connotation because you need downtimes to consolidate, to reflect, to really enhance your learning and to allow your brain some shutdown time during the day, right?
Yeah, it's really about processing time for your brain, right? We need time and space for our brain to take the information that we have consumed during our day and move that from short term memory to long term memory, right? To move it, to sort of reflect on it and chew on it and make connections. And one psychologist I talked to calls it marinating, right? We need to offer these ideas the opportunity to marinate in our brain. And really, the way that we do that is to sort of free our brain from our conscious control and let it do its thing. It becomes really powerful when we just sort of let it do its thing without our conscious interference. And so that's why a lot of times we have the solution to the problem after we sleep on it, or people say, I have my best ideas in the shower, right? It's when we can just sort of disengage and to see let our brain do its thing that the most powerful things happen.
Great. So three of those states are deliberate, you can control. I would probably say for me, the default state is being reactive and distracted. I don't need much encouragement to go down that path. But to take time out to daydream, I can do that. Focus and mindful when I need to get a task done, when I'm under a deadline, seems to do that. Let's talk a little bit about flow, because that's the optimal state that you really can't control, but you like to see yourself in more and more. If you could kind of unpack it a little bit, because I know there's that best-selling book on flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. And he does a great job in describing this experience, but everyone, I would think, would want more of that experience. It's just so hard to put into words and to encourage throughout the day, right?
Yeah. And I think that we can think a lot of times we think about flow as being kind of hours and hours and hours, right? Or this state that takes so much to get into and to stay there. But honestly, we can have flow for short periods of time, right? And I think that when we achieve full immersion in the thing, right? Maybe it's a task, maybe it's a conversation, maybe it's an experience, right? A book, a movie, sightseeing. It could be anything. But the point is, when all other parts of our internal chatter stop chattering, right? And we get total immersion in the thing, then that can be a version of flow. And so looking for more of those total immersion kinds of opportunities. And, I think even when you're having a conversation with someone or when you're doing something, I find when I'm speaking, right? I'm on stage, I'm doing my thing, and I'm sort of in and out of flow, right? I'm in it and there's no internal chatter. And then I'm still speaking, but it's like, oh, am I running out of time? I better skip the next couple of slides. And, right. Oh, I haven't given them a break in a while. It might be time to do that. Right. And then that, right. So I'm still delivering, but I'm not in a flow state. And I think all of us achieve that at certain times. We all kind of go in and out of it, but when we are in it, it's better. It's always better when we're in it.
And that's an important distinction to make, that you can go in and out of it. It's not something that you just are in for a long period and not. Are there ways to encourage it happening more frequently? Is there preconditions that you can have set in place to where you're more likely to get in it?
Yeah, so Csikszentmihalyi and Daniel Goleman, who's done a lot of work on flow as well. His book is called Focus, the Hidden Driver of Excellence. Excellent book. They talk about the conditions for flow are that it needs to be something that is sufficiently interesting and sufficiently challenging, because otherwise you'll get bored and you won't get into flow. But it can't be something that is beyond your capabilities. If it's too far beyond your capabilities, then you'll get frustrated and you won't get into flow. And the piece I would add to that is that your environment has to be completely free of distraction, because distraction prevents flow. Now, we could have multiple inputs in the service of one thing, right? That's not distraction. That's all in the service of one thing. But when you have an unrelated situation, that's a distraction, and that will take you out of flow. The two states are mutually exclusive. Distraction completely prevents flow.
Good point. I've heard this a lot from leaders too, that they're very good multitaskers. And I don't buy into that belief, because we really can't multitask. We just are switching rapidly between both tasks. Do you agree with that approach? Do you think that there are some tasks in which you could do multiple things at the same time? And how does that really parse out your attention if you try to take that approach?
Yeah. So one of the things I do with leaders is I spend a lot of time with them defining terms and helping them make sure that they are clear in their terms. So in this case, I think there's some ambiguity around this idea of multitasking, because we need to think about there's different ways to multitask, right? So you can physically multitask. Your body can do two things at once, right? You can walk and chew gum without falling down or choking most of the time, right? You can do one physical activity and one cognitive activity. For example, a lot of people pace when they're on the phone, because the movement actually does help you think. It does help you, generate thoughts and keep you on track. But when it comes to more than one cognitive activity, that's when you can't do it. Your brain can only do one cognitive thing, right? So if I were sitting here talking to you about this activity, I can't also be counting to 100 in my head, not without losing my place in the counting and also stumbling as I speak to you. So we can only do one cognitive thing. So when we think about, so usually when you say, can we or can't we multitask? Well, it depends. Are you talking about physically or cognitively or a mixture or what? But we can't do two cognitive things at once. And you're right. We think that we are doing two things at once, but really that even when we're thinking, we think that we're holding two or three or four simultaneous thoughts in our head, but really it's a linear process. It's one, then the next, then the next, then the next. And so the problem is when we are multitasking at work, right? You have the document, the report open, and then an email comes in, right? You don't continue to work on the document and also read the email at the same time, right? You stop the document and you read the email, and then you stop the email, and then you go back, hopefully, maybe minutes or hours or days later, you go back to the task, but it is switching. And the problem is there is a cost to the switching. And the cost is time and accuracy. So, in other words, when we are task switching, everything we are doing takes longer and the quality is lower. And so that's why when we are distracted, we end up being pressed for time because everything we're doing takes longer. And so if we would just do one thing at a time, everything would go faster and we would be able to get more done better.
I agree with you that task switching makes everything longer and you don't do it as well normally. The other question I have regarding that came to mind was the attention residue deficits that you have when you don't complete something and you move on to something else. It still occupies a certain part of your attention, which is a distraction in a sense. Some writers believe that they let it ruminate and set for days, weeks, and then come back to an article, come back to their book, and they have fresh insights as a result. So in some ways, maybe it's seen as a positive. I found though, a lot of times it's seen as a negative. If someone has 5 or 6 unfinished projects, it's better to do one, finish it before you do the second. What are your thoughts on that as well?
Yeah. So I would call the first thing that you described brain priming. And I didn't come up with that phrase. I don't know who, I wish I knew who did, but I think it's a great way to say it. That's more of an intentional thing. And I think that we can use brain priming a lot more often. So, for example, in my world, my speaker friends and colleagues, we often talk about it being hard to create new content. And, you got to sit down and write an article. And that's hard coming up. What am I going to say? And what am I going to talk about and whatever. But if we can use brain priming a little bit more intentionally and say, I'm going to decide what I'm going to write about. And I'm going to think about, what my main thesis might be. And then I'm going to walk away, right? That's the only task right now is to choose the topic and the thesis. And then I'm going to walk away for 3 days. And then when I sit down on day 4, I'm probably going to have, in fact, what I find is that I end up, if without brain priming, I'm like, oh, I put it off, I put it off, I put it off. But with brain priming, at some point, I think I have to clear the afternoon and write this article because I know exactly what I want to say and I can't wait to get it out of my head. Right. So it's a whole different experience. So I would call brain priming and multitasking are two different things. And really, it comes down to the intention. Did you just get distracted? That's not brain priming. That's task switching.
So with focused and mindful, which is probably, I would say, a state that everyone wants to be in more often, it comes down to mindfulness, but mindfulness really requires some control with the effort to stay focused. Have you found any forms of mindfulness or tools or techniques that are helpful for people listening to this podcast to say, okay, here's how you develop this habit. Here's how you develop this muscle, because most of us don't have very good focus. We live in a very distracted world. And to focus on something for more than maybe 5, 10 minutes, I know that with my kids, that could be a impossible task.
Yeah. And that's why I like this phrase attention management to encompass all these things because focused and mindful, they're sort of the same, but kind of different. I mean, this quadrant is really about concentration, right? This quadrant is about I am going to do this thing and I'm only going to do this thing and I'm going to really build up what I call brain power momentum, right? I'm going to get this brain power momentum on this thing and I'm going to spend this amount of time on it. So what happens is our habit of distraction, which is something I talk about a lot, right? We have become habituated to distraction. And that habit has been created in us on purpose by our technology. So we have this habit of distraction, and that habit of distraction chips away at our ability to stay focused for any period of time, but it also makes us less patient. So not only does it chip away at our ability to stay focused for any period of time, because we're so impatient, it chips away at our desire to stay focused for any period of time. So now it's really working against us. But the problem is when we do concentrate and when we do apply ourselves fully to that thing and maybe even get into flow, when we're done, it feels awesome. We're so excited to have completed that thing. It feels great. It feels like that big check mark that you can give yourself. I got that done. So our habit of distraction lies to us, right? It says, you don't want to do that. You don't have time to do that. That's going to be hard. Don't do that, right? When the truth is exactly the opposite. The truth is, I do want to do it. And when I do it, it's going to feel really good and be very satisfying. And the more we can do that, the more satisfying our days become. So, okay. So to answer the question you asked me, how can we build up our focus muscle again? A few ways, practicing the behaviors that I talk about in the book for, practicing attention management helps you expand your focus muscle. So one of the things that you need to do to practice attention management is you need to regain some control over your technology, right? So instead of just being at the mercy of our technology all the time with all of the pings and dings and push notifications and just all of the things, we've also gotten into this habit where sitting in wonder or sitting in I don't know is an untenable place, right? If you come up with a thing and you're like, I don't know the answer to that, the urge to find out the answer because you can find out the answer in like 5 seconds. So the urge to just get that answer is so overwhelming that becomes really difficult. So we need to exert control over our technology by just being more aware of how often we are allowing it to distract us. So certainly shutting off the notifications, but also taking more tech-free time, right? Trying to build some tech-free time into every day and some extended tech-free time as often as possible. I went on vacation to Hawaii and I locked my phone and my computer in the safe in the room. And I used my Kindle because I don't get email or anything else. It's just my books on my Kindle. And that was the only technology that I had for most of the time I was there. And it was glorious. It's glorious.
No, that's great. And that's something that I think everyone should be more mindful of the amount of distraction that technology has. You can use it the right way. It's great. But I read in one book that we really need to get better and more comfortable with being bored and not immediately going to a device or trying to distract us in some way, but just sit there, ruminate, think, daydream, but spend that time or just read a book for a period of more than 5, 10 minutes instead of looking for a summary of it, right? So that you develop these muscles of focus, you get better at mindfulness, and therefore your attention's going to grow as a result.
Yeah. And I really working to change that frame. I think we need to change, let's not call it boredom because boredom has this negative connotation, right? I think we need to be, and I think we need to be comfortable being, right? Whether that's consciously thinking about something or whether it's just using our senses, right? Looking at things and hearing things and noticing the smells in the air and right. And just sort of being, then that allows our mind time to wander, which then creates that learning and those insights and that creativity.
That's great. And then how the focus needs to be balanced with the daydreaming so your brain can restore, have time to reflect, to process, and consolidate, which is just as important as spending that focus time. Because with many leaders, I see with a lot of these time management systems coming into place, Cal Newport has a good book, Deep Work. He advocates for time blocking and allocate times for deep, thoughtful work. What I think a lot of these time management and productivity books don't say enough is you also have to leave time to get plenty of rest and to be able to have some downtime to consolidate these memories because you can't just be in focus mode all the time.
Yeah. And I think that I like to believe that my work picks up where Deep Work, which is a great book, kind of leaves off because it's really hard. Part of the reason that we're so distracted all day is because most of us don't really have a great way to stay on top of everything. Most of us really don't have a way to effectively manage our work, right? There's email coming at you all day long. You have hours and hours of meetings all day. You have a to-do list that's this long and growing. How do I wrap my arms around all that? How do I stay on top of everything that I need to do? Most people don't create those systems. I call it workflow management, right? They don't create those workflow management systems intentionally. They come out of necessity over time without intention. And so they end up being just not, nobody sits down and says, I think 18 sticky notes on my desk is the best way to handle all my stuff, or right, or this notebook that I bring everywhere I go and I write everything down. It's what I'm used to. It's the only thing that seems to be holding me together right now, but is it the most efficient? Probably not. And so really attention management, I mean, ultimately my job is to make people more productive, and attention management is a piece of this workflow management system that I teach that I call empowered productivity.
That's great. And I'm anxious to learn more about it. I wanted to get back to something we talked about at the beginning of the podcast before we end, and that's using the measures of productivity we are currently using. It's probably not is wrong or not the best use of them because we normally look at how many emails we send out, how much time we spend at the office, or really the big word is busy, right? How busy we are. And busyness should not be a badge of honor. Many people use it that way to say, I'm just overwhelmed, I'm so busy, hoping to elevate their status when in fact, it has very little connection or correlation to really how productive you are, correct?
Yeah, that's why I like to define productivity at the beginning, which is, what did you achieve that made a difference to you? What were your real accomplishments today that you feel good about? Because in truth, I don't think anybody has really cracked the day to day nut of like knowledge work or productivity, right? If you sit at a computer to do your job, at the end of the day, how do you know if you were productive? And really, the answer is, do you feel like you were productive? And if you feel like you were productive, then you probably were. And really, if I ask you, like, what makes you feel like you were productive? Most people will say, well, I finished that big report and I got that article done and I closed a deal, right? It was a good day. They don't say, well, I went to 6 meetings and I answered 10 phone calls and I sent 50 emails, right? That's not what we say. So recognizing that the definition of productivity is achieving significant results, that can help guide us into changing our behaviors so that we can do more of that.
Great stuff. And I advocate that being busy and being productive, two separate things. Productivity doesn't happen by chance. And everything in research, like you mentioned in your book, tells us that I'll get rest when I'm dead is not accurate. You need to take care of yourself if you want to be more productive and stay productive consistently over longer periods of time. And I think that's one area where a lot of leaders these days struggle because they're pulled in so many different directions and they feel like I just don't have time to take a break.
Well, and here's the truth. In order to achieve more of what's important to us, we need to make the best use of the resources that we have available to us. And our most important resources are not our money. It's not even our time. It's not even our attention. Our most important resources are our body and our mind. And if our pursuit of productivity or success comes at the expense of our physical or our emotional well-being, then it's ultimately destined to fail. And if our pursuit for our company, if our pursuit of our organization's success comes at the expense of our employees' physical or emotional well-being, it is ultimately destined to fail.
Completely agree with you. As we close today's episode, love for you to give our listeners some actionable insights, maybe into ways in which they can better control their environment or their workspace in order to increase their attention. So if there's one or two tips you could share with us, I'm sure they would greatly appreciate having some tools to use right away.
Absolutely. So for individuals, I would say make this the test of your phone notifications and your computer notifications. Does it help me in a real way? Does it contribute to me achieving more of what's important to me? So, for example, the alert that says that the meeting is going to start in 5 minutes, that's helpful, right? The alert that says that my gate has changed at the airport, that's helpful. But the alert that says there's some breaking news you should know about, or somebody just liked your LinkedIn post, right? That's just manipulation. That's just those technology developers trying to get you back to engage in the technology. And so regaining control over anything that isn't serving you is a really helpful rule of thumb. I thought long and hard about how social media was serving me or not. And as a result, I eliminated some social channels because I realized they really weren't serving me. Or the moment of, oh, isn't, Susie's baby so cute, right? The moment of that weighed against the vast disadvantages. It just wasn't worth it. So is it serving you for individuals? For leaders, I would say helping your employees to make the best use of the things that you hired them for to begin with, right? Which is probably the things that come out of their brain, and then creating an environment where they can best execute that brain power that you hired them for. Not only their knowledge and their experience and their wisdom, but also their compassion and their empathy and their diplomacy skills and their cooperation abilities, right? All of those things, your attitude, your perspective, all that stuff comes out of your brain. And when we are in an environment of bam, 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 all day long, this to that, to that, to that, to that, to that, to that. And often it's kind of the leader's fault, right? It's the leader who says, I just sent you an email 5 minutes ago. Didn't you get it? Or, sending emails late at night when employees should be having their downtime. Just a lot of leadership behaviors are setting employees up to struggle. So thinking about that is the advice I would leave.
Thank you. Great pieces of advice and a great episode. Thank you for sharing so many actionable insights with me and our listeners.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Charles.
Maura, let us know how our listeners can get a hold of you.
Yes, my website, maurathomas.com, has everything you need. You can contact me through that, my books, and all the ways to get empowered over your productivity.
Thank you very much. And this concludes then this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, it can be found both on Apple and Spotify. It can also be accessed on the Institute for Management Studies website at ims-online.com. And until next time, remember, it's not what you know, but what you do consistently that makes a difference.